My sister told the loan officer I was just the housekeeper, while I stood there holding the keys to the building we were sitting in. She didn't even glance my way. She tucked her hand into the crook of the banker's elbow, the same practiced little squeeze she'd used on every authority figure since we were kids, and said, "Don't mind her, she just comes along to carry my bags." The loan officer, young guy, maybe 2 years out of business school, looked at me anyway. Looked at my badge clipped to my blazer. His eyes moved from the photo to my face to the title printed underneath it. And something in his posture changed so fast my sister actually felt the air shift before she understood why. He stood up, pushed his chair back so hard it scraped the marble floor. "Ms. Calder," he said, and it wasn't to her, it was to me. "I had no idea you'd be joining us personally. We can absolutely accommodate whatever terms work for your family." My sister's smile froze halfway between confused and humiliated, stuck there like a photograph nobody wanted to keep. She didn't know yet that the building, the bank, and the $400 million sitting in the holding company that controlled both of them all had my name on the paperwork. But before I tell you how a banker learned more about me in 10 seconds than my own family had learned in 20 years, you should know what it cost me to make myself that invisible on purpose. If you've ever shrunk yourself down so the people you loved could feel bigger, hit that like button, because what my sister did next, she never saw coming. I was 11 the summer my father brought home a used calculator from the hardware store, where he worked the parts counter, and he set it on the kitchen table like it was a crown jewel. "This," he said, tapping the plastic casing with one grease-stained finger, "this is worth something. You can hold it. You can sell it. That's the only kind of value that's real." I was standing by the stove with a blue ribbon in my hand, first place in the regional math Olympiad, 400 kids from 3 counties, and I'd solved the tiebreaker problem in under 2 minutes while the proctor stood over my shoulder, timing me with a stopwatch. I held the ribbon up. My father looked at it the way you look at a weather report for a city you don't live in. Mildly informative, completely irrelevant. He picked the calculator back up, turned it over in his hands, and walked into the garage without another word. 40 seconds later, my younger sister Imogen came tearing through the back door waving a certificate over her head like she'd just landed a plane. Honorable mention, regional cheer competition. 42 girls got the same piece of paper. My mother dropped the dish towel she was holding and screamed loud enough that our neighbor's dog started barking through the fence 2 yards over. She scooped Imogen up, spun her in a circle, kissed the certificate, then taped it to the refrigerator dead center, right at eye level, where every person who opened that fridge for the next 6 years would see it before they saved a single thing inside. I stood by the stove holding a blue ribbon that had taken 400 competitors and 3 hours of mental arithmetic to win, and nobody in that kitchen looked at me twice. That was the pattern. I learned it the way you learn the layout of a house in the dark, not by being told where the furniture is, but by walking into it enough times that your body remembers before your mind does. By the time I was 16, the pattern had a name I gave it privately, in my head, because there was nobody to say it out loud to. I called it the furniture rule. I was furniture. Useful, load-bearing, expected to hold weight without complaint, and never, under any circumstance, the thing anyone looked at when they walked into the room. My father died when I was 17, a stroke at the parts counter on a Tuesday afternoon, gone before the ambulance made it past the second light. At the funeral, Imogen, 15 years old, threw herself across the casket with a performance so theatrical that 2 of our aunts had to be talked out of calling a doctor for her. Uncles lined up to hold her hand. Our mother's sister told her, in front of 40 people, that she was the strongest girl this family had ever raised. I sat 3 rows back with a legal pad on my knee, negotiating with the funeral home about a casket upcharge nobody had approved, calling our father's old coworkers to confirm pallbearer assignments, writing out the eulogy program because somebody had to and nobody else had thought to. I wrote 61 thank you notes that week in my best handwriting and mailed every single one myself because my mother told me, flatly, while filing a chipped nail at the kitchen table, that thank you notes were a waste of stamps nobody appreciated anyway. At 18, I got a letter from a school 3,000 miles from that kitchen, full academic scholarship to study finance and economics, one of 11 students selected out of the entire Western region that year. I'd spent 4 months prepping for the entrance interviews after school, alone, in the library, because nobody at home knew or asked what I was working toward at the dinner table every night with my head down over a textbook. I brought the acceptance letter home in an envelope I'd ironed flat so it would look crisp when I handed it over. My mother was filing her nails again, always filing her nails, like the world might ask something of her hands at any second and she needed them ready. She picked the envelope up between 2 fingers, read the first line, and set it down like it had left a residue. "Finance," she said, in the tone you'd use for a stranger's hobby. "So they're going to teach you how to count other people's money for the rest of your life. Try not to embarrass us. Imogen, sprawled on the couch with a phone glued to her palm, didn't even look up. She laughed through her nose, one short exhale, pure contempt with no effort behind it. I should have argued. I should have told her the acceptance rate was lower than most Ivy League schools that year. Instead, something in me made a calculation that had nothing to do with feelings and everything to do with survival. I folded the letter in half, zipped it into my backpack, and walked out of that kitchen without another word. That was the night I decided I would become very, very good at being unseen, because being seen in that house had only ever led to disappointment, mine or theirs, and I was tired of being the one who absorbed it. I won't bore you with every year of the climb, but I'll tell you this. By 26, I was running risk models for a regional investment fund out of a converted office above a dry cleaner, the kind of job nobody at a holiday dinner asks a follow-up question about. By 31, I'd built a small acquisitions firm with 2 partners and a line of credit so thin it could have snapped under a strong wind. We bought distressed retail properties nobody else wanted, the kind with broken HVAC systems and tenants 3 months behind on rent, and we turned them around one ugly deal at a time. I worked 80-hour weeks. I slept on a cot in the office twice a month when deals closed late. I learned to read a balance sheet the way other people read a room, instinctively in seconds, looking for the one number that was lying. By 39, the firm I'd helped build controlled, through a holding company nobody outside the industry had ever heard of, 41 commercial properties across 3 states, a regional credit union, and a controlling stake in the very bank my sister was about to walk into asking for a personal loan. I never told my family the name of the holding company. I never told them what I did beyond something with finance, boring stuff. Partly because every time I'd tried to explain anything about my work in the early years, my mother's eyes had gone glassy with disinterest before I finished the second sentence. And partly, if I'm honest, because some small, stubborn, wounded part of me wanted to see how long they could go on believing I was nothing while I quietly became everything. The bleeding started small, the way it always does. A car repair here, a tight month there. Then it became a tide I couldn't hold back even if I'd wanted to, because saying no had never once been modeled for me as an option inside that family. My mother's retirement fund collapsed after she sank $40,000 into a friend's essential oils franchise that folded within a year. I covered it without being asked twice. Imogen reinvented herself every 18 months, a boutique fitness studio, an online jewelry line, a luxury lifestyle consulting business that consisted mostly of posting photos in front of hotels she hadn't paid for. I paid for the studio's lease for 9 months before it closed. I covered the jewelry line's supplier debt when it went under. I wired money the way other families pass a salt shaker, automatically, without comment, because asking questions had only ever gotten me the furniture treatment all over again. Over 12 years, the total crossed $380,000. Money I'd earned underwriting deals other people were too scared to touch, sitting across negotiating tables from men twice my age who assumed every single time that I was somebody's assistant until I corrected them. Money that smelled like burnt coffee and red-eye flights and conference rooms where I was the only woman and usually the only person who'd actually read the full contract. And the entire time, my mother and my sister believed, completely, without one flicker of doubt, that I processed loan paperwork at a desk job downtown that paid maybe $60,000 a year. Thanksgiving 2 years ago, Imogen wore a coat I was fairly sure cost more than my first car, and she held court at the head of the table before anyone had even said grace. She'd started consulting for a real estate group, she announced, gesturing with her wineglass like a conductor. Big group. The kind that owned buildings downtown, she said, vague enough to sound impressive and specific enough to sound true. Actually, she said, looking right at me with that particular smile she saved for moments she thought she'd finally won, I think they might own the building your little office is in. Small world, right? Maybe I could put in a good word for you over there, get you something better than filing paperwork. The room laughed. My uncle slapped the table. My mother reached across the cranberry sauce and squeezed Imogen's hand like she'd just announced a Nobel Prize. I sat there with a fork in my hand and didn't say a word, because the real estate group Imogen was vaguely consulting for, doing unpaid brand partnership work in exchange for free hotel stays, and the occasional dinner, was a tenant in a building my holding company owned outright. I had personally signed off on their lease renewal 8 months earlier. I knew their finances better than their own CFO did. I smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach anywhere near the eyes, and said, "That'd be nice, Imogen. Put in a good word for me." Nobody at that table had any idea what they were actually laughing at. The detonator came 3 months later, on a Sunday afternoon, when I stopped by my mother's house to drop off groceries and saw a thick cream envelope half buried in the recycling bin under a flattened cereal box. The seal on the front was the one our state's Finance and Banking Association used on its annual honoree invitations, The kind I'd seen 100 times because I'd helped design the gold foil version of it myself, years ago. As a volunteer board member, nobody in my family knew I served on. I pulled it out. My name was printed across the front in raised lettering. Inside, an invitation to the keynote dinner, the most prestigious finance industry event in the entire region, where I was being honored that year as the recipient of the association's top award for community development lending. 400 guests, regional bank presidents, 2 sitting state senators expected to attend. My mother walked past with a laundry basket on her hip, saw what I was holding, and snatched it out of my hand without breaking stride. "I threw that in the recycling on purpose," she said. "Some scammer's been sending fake award letters to half the women in this zip code. They put your name on official-looking paper to get you to pay an entrance fee. You answer phones for a living, Renata. Why would anyone be giving you an award?" She dropped it back into the bin and walked off toward the laundry room, not even waiting to see whether I'd protest. The envelope landed face up on the crushed cereal box, my name staring up at the ceiling. That same week, my mother told me, almost as an afterthought, that she and Imogen had managed to get tickets to that very same dinner. Imogen had spent weeks working an old family friend who sat on the host committee, hoping to corner a few bank executives for her consulting. My mother handed me a single instruction before she walked away. Wear something plain, sit at the back, and don't embarrass either of them in front of important people. On the night of the dinner, I didn't wear anything that announced who I was. Dark dress, hair pulled back, my actual credential, the laminated keynote badge with my name and title in raised gold lettering, tucked into the bottom of my handbag where my mother would never think to look. I climbed into the back seat of her car. Imogen rode up front, scrolling through her phone, narrating which executives she planned to network with, as if she'd memorized their names off a press release that morning, which, knowing her, she probably had. We pulled up to the hotel's valet entrance and the security checkpoint at the private entrance for honored guests and sponsors, a separate line from general admission, badge required. My mother thrust her phone at the young attendant, some general admission ticket she'd bought off a resale site, and started rattling off names of executives she'd looked up that afternoon like she was dropping a password. The attendant, polite but firm, said this entrance required a guest badge, not a general ticket. My mother huffed, gestured back at me without turning around, and said, loud enough for the valet line behind us to hear, "She's nobody. She just drove us. Don't worry about her. Just let us through." The attendant looked past my mother, straight at me, the way people look at someone when their instincts are telling them something their eyes haven't confirmed yet. I reached into my bag and pulled out my badge. The gold lettering caught the entrance lighting, and the attendant's whole posture changed in under 2 seconds. He stepped back, said, "Ms. Calder, my apologies, I didn't realize," and pressed a button that opened the private rope line, already reaching for his radio to call ahead. My mother's mouth was still open from her sentence about me being nobody. Imogen turned around in the front seat, confusion sliding into something closer to dread. The hotel's event director met me before I'd taken 3 steps inside, clipboard against her chest, visibly relieved. "Mems. Calder, we were starting to worry. You're our keynote honoree. We have you seated at the head table. The senators specifically asked to be introduced to you before the program starts." Behind me, I heard my mother's heels stop clicking against the marble entirely. I won't pretend I didn't enjoy it. Just a little, watching the math finally land behind my mother's eyes. But I want you to understand something about people like her. People who weaponize a family's hierarchy until it calcifies into something nobody can question. Watching her face change wasn't the satisfying part. The satisfying part came later, and it didn't look anything like revenge. The ballroom doors opened to 400 people already seated, low conversation, the clink of water glasses being filled. When the program director called my name from the podium and the spotlight found the head table, the room rose. Not all at once in a wave, but in sections, like weather moving across a field, until every single person in that ballroom was standing, applauding, and I was looking out at a sea of people who had no idea who I was 20 minutes earlier and now wouldn't stop clapping. My mother and Imogen were seated at a folding table near the kitchen doors, the overflow seating reserved for guests who'd registered late, and from where I stood at the podium I could see both of their faces, lit by the projection screen behind me that showed my photo blown up 20 feet tall next to the words Community Development Award, Renata Calder. I gave my remarks. I talked about the small business owners I'd helped keep their doors open during the worst years, about restructuring debt instead of foreclosing, about choosing, every single time it was financially possible, to give people a second chance instead of a collection notice. I didn't look at my mother's table again until the very end, and when I did, I said one line I'd been carrying in my chest for 20 years without knowing where to put it down. Nobody builds anything worth having by being loud about it. The quietest people in any room are usually carrying the most weight. I'd ask you to remember that the next time somebody tells you they're just anything. I didn't name her. I didn't have to. Every muscle in my mother's face told me she understood exactly who I was talking about. After the dinner, my old mentor from the credit union board, a woman named Dr. Fenwick, who'd spent 30 years building community lending programs before most of these bankers had finished college, pulled me into the hallway and didn't let go of my arm until she'd said her piece. "I watched your mother let an event attendant tell you that you were nobody," she said. "I watched you smile through it. How many more years are you going to let people treat your generosity like an entitlement instead of a gift? You built all this. Stop apologizing for the size of it." She was right, and something in me that had been bolted shut for 2 decades came loose right there in that hotel hallway. I called a car instead of riding home with my mother. In the back seat, under the dome light, I opened my banking app and looked at the standing transfers I'd set up years ago and never once revisited: monthly support to my mother's household account, quarterly payments toward Imogen's rotating business debts, an annual lump sum that covered my mother's property taxes so she'd never have to think about them, 12 line items, automated, invisible, the financial equivalent of holding my breath for over a decade. I canceled every single one that night. No message attached, no warning, just the quiet click of a toggle switch, one after another, until the screen confirmed there were no active transfers remaining. The next morning, I sent one email, addressed to both of them, 4 lines long. I told them the financial support was over, effective immediately, no negotiation, and that I would always love them, but I would no longer fund a version of our family that required me to disappear. I attached nothing except a link to the press release the association had published that morning about the award, with my full title listed underneath my name. Within a week, my mother's car insurance lapsed because the autopay I'd been quietly covering bounced. Imogen's latest venture, a skincare line she'd been financing through credit she didn't actually have, collapsed within 10 days when her supplier ran a basic background check and discovered the investor backing her, listed only as a family member with undisclosed assets, had just been profiled in 3 regional business journals the same week as one of the most influential lenders in the state. My mother showed up at my office 12 days later, no appointment, mascara already smudged before she'd said a single word, and the first thing out of her mouth wasn't an apology. It was a guilt sentence, polished and ready, the kind she'd probably rehearsed the whole drive over. "Your father would be ashamed of you, humiliating your sister like that in front of everyone." I sat behind my desk and let the silence stretch until it became unbearable for her, the way I'd learned to do in negotiations where the other side always cracks first if you simply refuse to fill the quiet. When she finally ran out of script, I opened the bottom drawer of my desk, pulled out a folder, and slid it across the glass without a word. Inside was a printed copy of the award citation, the full financial bio the association had compiled for the ceremony, 12 years of deal history, the holding company filings with my name listed as majority owner. "You can read it here," I said, "or you can keep telling people I answer phones. But you don't get to do both anymore." She read 3 pages in complete silence and then folded over the desk and cried in a way I'd never once seen her cry, not even at my father's funeral, not theatrical, not performed for an audience, just raw and stunned and finally honest. A month passed before she called again. She asked me to come by the house, said there was something in the garage she needed me to see. I almost didn't go. I'm glad I did. She'd been clearing out my father's old workbench, the one that had sat untouched since he died, because the bank had sent a notice about the house, and she'd finally started sorting through what could be sold. Underneath a layer of receipts and old hardware catalogs, she found a manila folder with my name written on the tab in his handwriting. Inside was the blue ribbon from the Math Olympiad, the one I'd held up in that kitchen 28 years ago while he walked past it into the garage. He'd kept it. Underneath that was a newspaper clipping from the year I graduated college, a tiny mention in the business section about a scholarship recipient from our town, my name circled in pen so hard it had nearly torn through the newsprint. And at the bottom, a piece of scrap metal he must have welded himself sometime in his last few years, bent crudely into the shape of an open hand, with 4 words scratched into the surface, the strongest one I made. My mother handed it to me with both hands shaking. "He kept asking about you," she said, quietly. "He'd ask me what you were working on, and I'd tell him I didn't know because you never explained it and I never asked. I thought he didn't care because he never said anything to your face. I was wrong. He just didn't know how to say it where you could hear it." I stood in that garage holding a piece of welded scrap metal that meant more to me than any award citation printed on heavy cardstock, and for the first time in my adult life, I let myself cry where someone could see it. At the family gathering that spring, the wall in my mother's living room that had been covered for 15 years with Imogen's dance trophies and cheer ribbons was bare, freshly patched and painted. Imogen stood on a step stool with a level in one hand, hanging a single framed copy of the award citation beside that twisted little piece of metal my father had made. She didn't say much that day. She didn't perform an apology the way she'd performed everything else her whole life. She just hung the frame, stepped down, and sat next to me at dinner without trying to fill the silence with a story about herself, maybe for the first time since we were children. My mother stood up before anyone touched their plates and said the only thing I'd ever needed to hear from her, 20 years too late but not too late to matter. "This is my daughter," she said, her voice cracking on the word daughter like she was lifting something heavy. She built more than any of us understood, and for years I told her she was nothing while she quietly held this whole family up. I was wrong, and I'm done pretending I wasn't. It wasn't a grand speech. It didn't need to be. It filled a space that had been empty since I was 11 years old, standing by a stove with a blue ribbon nobody wanted to look at. I think about that calculator sometimes, the one my father set on the table like a crown jewel, the one he said was the only kind of value worth having because you could hold it in your hand. He was wrong about the calculator, but he wasn't wrong about value. It just took both of us most of our lives to understand that some of the most valuable things you build are the ones nobody can see you carrying, right up until the moment they finally do. If you've ever had to wait years for the people who love you to finally look up and see what you'd been quietly building the whole time, tell me in the comments how long you waited and whether it was worth it.